1966 to become athletic director at Trent University and brought with him a skill and love of squash, rugby, and cricket. Since then, he has carved out a unique career in sports as an exceptional athlete, coach, referee, and builder. Paul has also inspired generations of Trent students and the community at large with his dedication, skill, and good humor. Born in Orpington, England, Paul came to Canada in 1960 and as a student at the University of Toronto in 1964, was awarded the George M. Biggs Trophy as Outstanding Athlete for his leadership, sportsmanship, and performance in squash and rugby. He's a 6-time city champion in squash and in his age group, twice provincial champion. During his distinguished squash career, Paul has also been a finalist in Canadian, U.S., and World Masters Squash Championships. In 1993, he received Squash Ontario's highest honor, a Special Achievement Award for his contributions as a player, coach, and administrator. Paul has organized numerous local squash tournaments and international rugby tours. He played for the Peterborough Pagans rugby team for 10 years, including 1967 when they won the Ontario Intermediate Championship. He has been a long-time rugby referee at the high school, university, and senior club level and is an honorary life member of the Peterborough Rugby Union Football Club. Inducted in 2002, Paul Wilson, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, it doesn't flash back right away?
No, it does a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Now, it's when I talk to people about you, it's you came over here with your sports in a basket, essentially, right? You knew what sports were yours. You didn't come over here and have to learn anything new. You just came in over here and you took those sports that were really, really popular in Europe and started to grow them here in Peterborough and Toronto and really applied your craft here in Ontario. What was that like walking in with your skill set into a completely foreign world of sport?
Well, when I came to Peterborough, it wasn't completely new because having spent 4 years at U of T. But one of the things that I always found difficult to understand coming to North America was this idea of cutting people, telling people that they couldn't play. And I found that very strange. So when I came for the interview to Trent, my sort of feeling was sport is for everybody. And if you have 15 on one team, then you get another team. So I think that's what sold it to the Trent people who interviewed me.
Mm-hmm. Why was that attitude prevalent in England, but not here, in your opinion?
I don't know why it was prevalent in Europe and England, but I know with rugby over there, the school that I went to had 8 teams. You never told anybody that they couldn't play or they weren't good enough to play. Mm-hmm. And that's the value of intramural sports as well. You give them another option to play, but allow them to play.
Is that why like United Kingdom soccer has 5 levels of, or 5 tiers of soccer? From the premiership all the way down?
Well, it's interesting you should bring up soccer. I think probably way back that's how it started. But today in the Premier League, there's hardly any English players playing. Mm-hmm. They're all come from Europe, most of them. But yeah, that probably was one of the reasons that you and then below the 4 Premier Leagues and the Championship leagues, there's other leagues as well, so everybody gets a chance to play.
Now, I've been to the UK to play rugby, and it was a very difficult experience. So when you came here, was it really easy? Did you find the game easy as soon as you stepped on a field in Canada?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, rugby's an interesting game, and I wouldn't describe it as easy, but it was a different environment. And it was something you were promoting. Mm-hmm. And now, you know, U of T obviously had rugby before I got there, but they were a group of international players, and one of the objects was to get Canadian-born people to play the game. And in the end, we did that.
What was it that drew people in?
I think the camaraderie a lot. The post-game is significant for rugby, and just generally rugby it's a wonderful game, and it wasn't, shall we say, the violence associated today with rugby. And I think rugby today has a bit of a problem with the violence and injuries. And that wasn't the way 50 years ago. And I think they were attracted by the running of the game, the camaraderie, as I said, and it is a wonderful game, or was a wonderful game. I have some trepidation with professional rugby because it is so violent, and there are injuries, and there are serious injuries in a way, and I think in today's rugby, the organisers have to consider changing the rules, which will be a very significant step, I know. Mm-hmm. But for one thing, in professional rugby, I wouldn't have 15 players on the field. Now, the reason they won't do that is because it then becomes like rugby league. But at the professional level, these guys are now so big and so fast, and they're getting injured.
I was going to say, that's similar to the argument people make about hockey. With the players becoming more athletic, faster, bigger, and the smaller space, it's causing more injuries. But it's rare that I've heard people talk about rugby. It's actually rare that you hear people talking about rugby on that level at all in Canada. Do you miss those conversations? I know you might still find them at the Pagans Rugby Club.
No, I don't miss those conversations because I don't think they happen as much at the amateur level. But at the professional level, where practices are every day, body contact is every day, I think rugby has to address some issues.
Okay, so let's go back again to when you first got here, and it was 1960. Do you care to say how old you were in 1960?
I was 21.
21. What brought you to Canada?
Well, it's an interesting question. In England in those days, one had to do national service. So I elected to do it in the Navy. And I was stationed on a ship, HMS Vidal, in the West Indies. And I didn't know what to do, whether to stay in or not. And actually that was my first sports job in a way. I was the sports coordinator for that ship. So you had to go ashore and arrange games. But I didn't know what to do, and I became very friendly through visiting a pub in Port of Spain called the Pelican. Was it the Pelican? I think it was. And this guy was a graduate of U of T. And he said to me, don't stay in the Navy. You've had a wonderful time. Why don't you consider going to the University of Toronto? Well, it had never crossed my mind before to do that. So I came out of the Navy, went back to England, and applied to go to U of T. And the advantage then, I was accepted as a mature student. Now, what mature meant in those days, I'm not sure, but nevertheless. And I decided to go and had a wonderful 4 years, and it was a great move for me. And that was my first connection to Trent, because I met Tom Simons and a fellow called Michael Treadwell, who told me about the position here.
You have to tell me a little bit more about your time at U of T as well, playing sports. And what was what was the competition like for you? Which sports were you participating in? Were you just jumping all over the place?
No, there was some. We played in the OUA, it was, and the OUAA. We played Western, McGill, Western, McGill, Queens, and it was U of T. It was just those four to begin with, but then it expanded, rugby, and in squash, it was the same. It was just the big four, and then it expanded again. So during those 4 years, the expansion of OUA, AA intercollegiate sport was significant.
Mm-hmm. And for you going and meeting all those new people, I know that sport's a great way for people to bond when they do get to a new country or a new city. Is that what the same story was for you as well with the people that you have? Well,
I can't remember exactly, Dan, but I suspect the first week I was in Toronto, I found out where U of T rugby were practicing on the back campus and joined them. I said, I've played a bit before, I'd like to, and they were very welcoming, and it went from there, from 4 years. And we had, to begin with, as I said before, it was mainly international players, but gradually Canadian-born players introduced to the game and became very good.
Was it mostly people from the UK when you say international?
The UK, South Africa, and Australia.
Okay, so a pretty formidable rugby team then.
Well, there were some very good players, yes.
What position were you playing?
I was fly half, which is the link between the backs and the forwards. And the thing with that position is you don't have to tackle very often. So I avoided injury, and I learned not to tackle.
Were you wearing the number 9?
Number 9's the scrum half.
Oh, scrum half.
Number 10.
Okay, the one after. Okay, yes, right before the centers.
And then the
wingers?
centers, 12, 11, 12, 13 and 14 are the wings.
Okay, so you're making that first decision with the ball, I guess,
Yes,
once you get
yeah,
it out.
yeah,
so
you
similar
are.
to a quarterback, I guess, in American
Well,
football.
there's a similarity to that, yes, because you are the sort of tactician. And, you know, I was fortunate that year. The previous guy had graduated, so there was an opening. So luck was with me.
So you got to see that sport grow a little bit in Toronto, and then you mentioned you meet somebody and it brings you right to Peterborough to apply for a job as a sports director.
That's right. And I wouldn't have known about the job at Trent if it wasn't for a guy called Michael Treadwell, who said, you should apply for this. So I thought, well, in those days, Trent flew me over for an interview, so I thought, I get a free trip to Canada, I may as well go. But I came for the interview, stayed at the old Empress Hotel. It was a 3-day thing, and then when I got back, they offered me the job.
They flew you from Toronto to Peterborough?
No. I went from Toronto back to England.
Okay, gotcha.
And then from England to Peterborough.
So you weren't considering staying in Canada at all?
Well, my mother wasn't. My mother was not well, so that's the reason I went back. And I didn't really know, honestly, what I was going to do. Okay. I was in a quandary. And then this wonderful opportunity at Trent came up, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And here we are, 56 years later.
I can assume you had not been to Peterborough before at that
No,
point in time.
I had no idea where it was. Peterborough, I had no idea.
So you found yourself in multiple scenarios where you're just really jumping into a entirely, I guess the language barrier is not going to be there, but it's still entirely foreign territory. Toronto and Peterborough are still different worlds.
It was a different world, but the initial people at Trent were so welcoming, and you were part of a new process. When I first came to Trent, I looked for the athletic facilities. Well, I could have looked all day because there weren't any. So, you know, and what were there in 1966? 400 students. And those original students at Trent took a bit of a risk because Trent was unknown. It was a new university. Parents wanted their children to go to established universities, and you got interesting students, and they were very amenable in that day to getting involved in extracurricular activities. Mm-hmm. And there'd been nobody sort of before, so one thing led to another.
What was the goal for it? Because I guess when you do think about universities across the OUA, Trent isn't, I guess, what you think of as a school that's entirely focused on sports, where there are some, or maybe like Western has that reputation, or
right,
they're really focused on that. But what was the goal for the sports program for you?
I think my goal was to get as many students involved in some kind of athletic program that I possibly could. And I think we felt that to begin with, you had to start at an intramural level and gradually go from there. The other difference at Trent was in those days, and I'm not sure what the situation is now, athletics had to pay its own way. So you got money from, it was part of the fee, students, plus anything else you could do selling things. I mean, you had to be a bit of an entrepreneur to get the money as well. So you couldn't afford a sport like football, it was too expensive. We did have a good intramural hockey program and then an intercollegiate hockey program, but if you don't have your own arena, that becomes a problem. But I mean, now, you know, they have very good lacrosse teams. In fact, the final of lacrosse, intercollegiate cross, is this weekend.
This weekend, yeah. Big Ottaway, yeah. Yeah, that's going to be an exciting affair. Well, I guess you're playing to the community, I guess, with strong lacrosse.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I mean, they've got very good, very strong lacrosse coaches now from the community as well.
And as you started building this, I guess, intramural, it evolves into what I guess gets called extramural a lot of the time.
Yeah, you get intercollegiate. It expands into that rather than the other way round.
So what was the first foray, I guess, beyond that, beyond extramural?
You know, I can't honestly, but it's funny you should ask that, because I did notice that 50 years ago, a Trent student, Richard Fleming, won the OUAA squash championship, 1972. And I did write him a note because I felt that he wouldn't have recognized this. And I said, you know, it's 50 years, Richard. So you're over 70 now. And he wrote back to me and he remembered who he played in each round. He remembered everything. So it was a bit nostalgic, that really. So that sticks in my mind at the minute.
Squash.
But, well, that one does, but the other thing I remember, and what year it was, but our men's soccer team were playing U of T in Varsity Stadium. And I went down to the game, and I was really pleased that I went because Trent won 1-0. And I thought, well, that's ironic. Here's my alma mater, and we've beaten them in Varsity Stadium. So that one sticks in my mind as well.
So you took pride in what you created versus what you came from at U of T?
Yeah. No, I took great pride in beating them as well.
Yes.
Now, it was soccer, but I like the fact that it was in Varsity Stadium as well.
Well, it's nice to have, well, names of stadiums can be iconic, just like names of wings at university. I know if you walk the halls near the Trent facilities, you're going to see a lot of pictures of your face. You're going to see your name all over the place.
Yeah, no, I apologize.
Yes. But you don't think about it. When I went to Fleming in Peterborough, my friend, who was my roommate at the time, was going to Trent. We'd play squash all the time. I would go in with him to the Trent facilities and play squash. I had no idea who Paul Wilson was at the time, but
well, here we are now.
Yes, here we are now. Yeah, but still, to have that stamp on Trent University permanently, what does that mean to you?
Oh, it means a lot. I am still very privileged to be associated with Trent, and particularly with Trent alumni. And I still have contacts with them, and they're all very gracious. And, you know, I was there 36 years. And no, I still have very fond memories. I was very fortunate, and I'm still lucky enough to meet alumni who have had a good experience in athletics, and in fact a good experience overall at Trent.
Mm-hmm. When you do see things, well, just let's say 4 years ago, the U19 Women's World Lacrosse Championships happening at Justin Chu Stadium. When you do see events like that, do you feel, I guess, another sense of pride in yourself that you were there to kickstart this movement that's brought it to a stadium where it can actually host a major athletic event?
Well, yes, that does. And one, again, that particularly sticks in mind, we hosted in the gym when the Memorial Cup was held in Peterborough. The banquet was held in the gym. And Bob Gainey was the guest speaker, and a really impressive guy. But I didn't know this. He's totally bilingual, so he spoke in French as well, and that's another thing that sticks in my mind. And yeah, that was a wonderful occasion. But one thing I should mention is that when I first came to Trent, there were no athletic facilities. Well, the field was just being developed, and it took 10 years before we got the gym and the building open. And that 10 years, we had a great partnership with the City Recreation Committee to get arenas, PCVS, gym, fields. But it took 10 years to get our own facility.
Do you remember some real moments where you thought this might not ever take off, this might just die here?
Yes, I did think that. Because what used to happen was, in those days, universities sent a delegation to the Committee on Colleges in Queen's Park. And the Trent people invited me to go and say a few words. And for the first 5 years, it had little or no effect. So you get a bit sort of thinking, is this ever going to happen? And then after 10 years, they accepted it. They gave us some money. Trent raised some money. And this shows the difference in price. I think that building originally cost $2.5 million. Mm-hmm. And what it would cost today, goodness knows. And then, to be fair, it was expanded probably 15 years ago, and now it's a very nice building.
Yeah, excellent facility. There are a lot of people in the Hall of Fame here that go clearly into the athlete category and clearly into the builder category, and I feel like you're going to walk that line down the middle a little bit. But what is it about? There are some people who are athletes who have no interest in doing anything beyond just playing the sport, right? But then your development of these sports, of an entire facility, of an entire program at Trent University, where does that stem from for you, the passion for organization and driving sport forward for others?
Well, you had to do a bit of that at U of T with rugby. It wasn't, in those days, there was hockey, basketball, and football, and rugby was, so you did a bit of promotion and organization. But then when you get a job with no facilities, you realize you've really got to do some promotion and organization here.
It's a necessity.
Well, exactly. And, I'm not criticizing the founders, but an athletic facility was nowhere in their plans. And so it took a decade, but these things happened, and in the end it was successful.
But going back to you in the Navy as well, you were the sports coordinator on your ship?
Yeah, I was. But what that involved, Dan, was going, when we got to a port, going ashore and meeting the local sports people and saying, we want a rugby, soccer, or cricket match against your local team. And in the West Indies, cricket is a huge game, so there was no problem getting that. Soccer's a huge game, there was no rugby they were a bit reticent about, but they were all amenable in the end, and it became a very important part of visiting each port. So that sort of was a grounding for me as well.
That sounds quite chaotic, and just walking up like, hey, you guys want to play a game?
I think to describe it as chaotic is very good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you had to find out who was there. But the first thing, there'd always be a club. I mean, cricket in Port of Spain, for instance, there's so many clubs you don't know which one to go on. And they were all so helpful. Nobody ever said in that particular show, no, we're not interested in playing. That never happened. You might have had some difficulty arranging a time and a date, but nobody ever turned you down.
Wow. Any strong teams that you ran into?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. Very strong teams. Although they said yes, they certainly had no intention of losing. And, the teams from a ship are not that strong. But so, no, we did meet some very strong teams. But again, there was a camaraderie after it. The captain of the ship was very supportive. The sailors were very supportive. And it gave them a nice introduction to every port.
You got, again, your three sports that you're listed as, I guess, really competing in: cricket, squash, and rugby. Which one is your favorite?
For me, rugby is my favorite. But at that time, in the West Indies, cricket is their favorite. There's no question. And they were very good at it.
And cricket would be non-existent in Canada at that time when you came over. Unless you, I guess, stumble across some Indian populations or some UK populations. But now in Peterborough, there is a cricket facility.
Yeah, and there was then a cricket club in Peterborough. Okay. Yeah, it was started by, I think, in about the mid-50s by a reporter from the Peterborough Examiner, and he started it, and it's now gone from. It's very strong now. I think very well.
Yeah, the North End. Yeah,
in the North End, a very nice ground. And the trouble with cricket is, well, in the West Indies, there's always good pitches, but you need a good pitch, otherwise the ball flies about a bit.
You get knocked with the ball.
Yes.
Somewhere you don't want to get hit with the ball.
No, you don't want to do that. No.
So trying to pick these sports up here, and I guess trying to get your sports off the ground here. I know you talked a little bit about how at U of T it was mostly guys who were already competing in the sports from their home countries, but beyond that, getting it launched in Peterborough, because I know that if you go to Trent University, you're going to see, like I mentioned, the squash courts, but getting that launched here, how difficult was it?
It wasn't that difficult. I felt as well that hockey, ice hockey, we had to do something significant with ice hockey. And I'm actually very proud of this. At one point, and I honestly, Dan, can't remember which year, but probably in the late 70s, mid-70s, we had 34 intramural hockey teams who played at the old North Crest, which is now ploughed down.
It's too many teams for the North Crest.
That's, yeah. So that involved a lot of students, and I think that fed into other sports. And I know a number of those hockey players came to play soccer or rugby, and they were involved and they wanted to expand their athletic horizon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess keeping people involved, I guess it just feeds off of.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and in that intramural program, there was a couple of women's teams as well, and that was the start. And then we had a basketball league as well, and then an intercollegiate basketball team, but we were never strong enough basketball-wise, or it took some time to get to a competitive level, and that's a bit hard to take when you're getting hammered all the time.
Mm-hmm. As Fleming College took all the good basketball players.
Yeah, they probably did. Yes. And the coach, I think, at one stage.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell me about how you ended up with the Pagans? It seems like a pretty natural transition, but...
It was when I first came over, again, I joined the Pagans, and it wasn't called the Pagans in those days. I think it was just... And then in 1967, we had a very good team and won the Ontario Intermediate. And that was mainly Canadian-born players as well. But that club as well has gone from strength to strength. And when I heard some years ago that they were moving the bowling clubhouse for their house, and it cost them a lot of money, I thought, and the city lent them some money, I thought there's no way they're going to be able to pay that back. Well, 2 or 3 months ago, they paid it all back and they're now clear. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, they've been going strong, and they keep promoting athletes to the national level.
Yes,
as well.
they do. Yep, they do. And they've got them, the teams all the way down to the junior and flag rugby. And actually, an interesting thing, a Trent alumni, Caleb Smith in Niagara, started flag rugby in Ontario, and that's gone by leaps and bounds now. And he started that probably 10 years ago.
When was the last rugby game you played?
I think, oh God, God, you've got me. I would say for the Kawartha Crocs,
Yeah.
the old time people, and it was probably when I was 50 odd, and I remember I tried to attempt a drop goal on the move, and the ball went off out of touch. And I thought, Wilson, it's time for you to retire. So I did. Yeah. But the Croc, I mean, that's another age group the Peterborough Club have got. Mm-hmm. And we had a memorable tour to Ireland, I would say just before I retired.
Yeah.
And that was a Crocs tour, and it was wonderful. And Ivan McCulley was, Dr. Ivan McCulley was one of the leading lights of that tour. And at his old club, the Instodians, they had a night to remember Ivan, and it was very emotional for him, and it was a wonderful night, and there were Irish international players there, and it shows how well respected Ivan was as a rugby player and club member.
Yeah, the Peterborough Club has a strong reputation. Well, where I grew up in Durham region, I knew about the Peterborough Club growing up as well. Just
did you?
Because of its reputation. Yeah, in Durham there's the Oshawa Vikings and Ajax Wanderers, and a lot of people that I grew up with would end up playing for those teams, and they'd talk about Peterborough, I guess, when you get up here. Now, what kind of, just talking to you or knowing you for a little bit, just as your work with Kojiko and Your TV hosting shows, you have a pretty jovial manner, a pretty calm guy.
Well,
when it comes down to it on a sports field, is there a different Paul Wilson?
I would hope there isn't. No.
No.
I mean, in the end, and you know, with the world things going on, you're playing sport for pleasure, for enjoyment, for recreation, for fitness. And sure, you might get an odd bit of excitement, but basically keep a calm and think about it and outplay the other side. And if they get a bit excited, good. So I try to keep that calmness, yes.
It's a very British mentality.
Well, you try.
Yeah.
You try. And, you know, I think the other aspect of all sport that I've always felt, the standard sportsmanship is very important. And once you lose that respect for other players in whatever the arena might be, I think you've lost something. And so I've always been a great proponent of sportsmanship and respect for opponents and respect for officials. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to have that. The respect for officials, it helps when you've officiated yourself. And there have been moments when I've been refereeing where people have got very excited, and you try to calm them down. But I think sportsmanship and respect is very important in all forms of sport.
Have you had a hard time watching lacrosse before, or hockey? Have you thought this is barbaric?
No, I never thought that. I thought it was a different environment, and but I would never have been critical to those sports, no. And I think it's showing, because I think there is less problem today than there was 10 years ago.
Definitely, definitely.
And I think more people are coming to realize that you've got to have this respect, both for officials and for your opponents and for other players.
Like you said, you've done it on both sides. You've been a referee, or what is a referee called in rugby? Just a referee?
Yeah, just a
Okay,
referee.
never know.
Well, he's called many things.
Yeah.
But I can only honestly say one name now, referee.
Yes.
And it's not an easy game to referee. Nobody ever said that.
Not an easy game to play or broadcast.
No, it's not. It's not. So, but I think the respect to officials now has improved as well. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So you definitely would have encountered some guys who were coming over to play rugby from playing hockey who brought that anger over or excitement.
Well,
as you say.
yeah, they did, but they calmed down when they realized. I mean, most of them calmed down, not all of them, but when they realized it wasn't going to do them any good as well. But one thing about rugby I would like to mention is the growth of women's rugby. And at the present time, the Women's Rugby World Cup is going on in New Zealand. And it's excellent. And the standard of rugby played and the skills shown by those women is exemplary. And Canada are right up there. They're in the semi-finals. And they're a very good team. So, and the respect there, it's female officials, but the respect between the players and the officials is exemplary. And I notice the officials continually talking to the players. And
Instead of screaming. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. Yeah. Well, yes, I've actually caught a couple of those games as well, and the women's teams are just. There's I don't know how you would describe it, but the boiling point seems to be higher. Well, they will go and go and go, where the men will snap a lot sooner on each other.
Yeah, and there's not the violence that there is in some of the men's games. And there's no question, those women are very skillful at that game.
And the rugby culture, or the culture of rugby, I know when I was playing in high school, my coach would tell me it's the sport of gentlemen, or a gentleman's game. If we were swearing or something like that, there was no swearing on the rugby pitch, and then I'd be coming over from hockey, and what are you talking about? You swear nonstop.
No, well, I think they've always tried to have that you know, you've got to keep the respect.
And then after the game, well, at the club level where the Pagans would play, both teams, no matter what happened on the field, would be meeting in the clubhouse.
Absolutely. And I mean, people sort of joke about that, after a game, but it's a very important aspect of the game, I think. And this camaraderie is very important. And then you suddenly realize, this guy I'm talking to, he's a really nice guy. Why did I get so excited about him? So.
Probably because you're just like that other person. And your passion for organizing, and I guess just being involved in everything as well. When it does come down to it, on an induction night at the Hall of Fame, you're here, I guess, kicking things off with a toast.
Well,
where did that start?
Well, no, I did, and I think the Sports Hall of Fame is outstanding. I mean, it's more than a Sports Hall of Fame. It's a museum, and to me, it's a holder of the legacy of sport in the city of Peterborough. And the city of Peterborough has a very distinguished legacy in many sports. And I think what the Sports Hall of Fame does is invaluable. And in this facility, it's so well looked after. And I particularly like now the Remembrance Day display as well. And I congratulate the volunteers on this. I think they do a wonderful job, and it's invaluable.
And your toast to the Queen as well, I guess.
Well, I'm a monarchist. I think, you know, I think she was an amazing woman and devoted her life to the well-being of others. And I'm honored to do the toast, and I will continue to do toast, not to the Queen now, but to the King.
Are you in possession of the portrait of the Queen that came down from the Memorial Center? Not sure where that went off to.
Yeah, no, I'm not in possession of that, but no, but I am a great respecter of the monarchy.
How much, well, this is a little bit off the side, but did you feel that sense of pride knowing that this arena, I believe it's was one of two that still had a portrait of the Queen up in the rafters?
Yes, I think that was a moment of pride. I think that's good for Peterborough, and yes, I am. And you know, whenever I mean, she was an incredible woman, 72 years, and I can remember when she arrived on the throne and had to come back from a tour of Kenya or something, I think it was, and when you look at the leaders of the world today, she stands way ahead, head and shoulders. She never, and I think most people would agree, she never put a foot wrong.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep on focusing on what you've done in this community, in terms of leadership roles, just staying involved, and what you do actually. I'll just go to what I have the most experience with, and you joining on community broadcasts. I know you've been on our rugby broadcasts, you've been on dozens of political talk shows, just interviewing people in the community similar to the way that we're doing right now,
Yes,
I guess.
yeah.
But what's your reason to stay involved in that as well? And I guess promotion of Peterborough is something that you're really taking part in as you continue to go on.
Well, let me preface by anything to say, I say regularly, if not weekly, I am so lucky to live in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. And this community has been so good to me. And if people want me to sort of promote it, I'm honored to do that. With the program we do, it is like this. It's just a conversation with a variety of people who've made significant contributions. And last week we had representatives from the Sports Hall, Pat Bronson and Sally Graham on, and hopefully that broadcast is this week. And I've always had a slight, well, more than slight. I was on Peterborough City Council for 12 years, 14 years, whatever it was. And I've always held that interest in politics. And I'm honored to do that.
When you were, I'm assuming you were a champion for the development of sports venues in the city when you were on City Council.
Yes, I can't recall during that time any huge discussion over the development of sports villages. I mean, it just went on its way, but it was a great experience for me. Actually, an interesting fact of that was the first election I ran, which was 85, I think. I lost the election by 9 votes. So I was told by somebody, you better ask for a recount. So I did go for a recount, and Judge Murdoch was doing the recount, and you also count spoilt ballots. And he said, I hadn't just sat down, and he said, well, nobody will argue with this. There's a line through all of us, all of you, and it says, you're all a load of rubbish. However, we overcame that, and I won the recount by 35 votes or something, and then was on for the next 12 years.
Well, you talk about the distinct, I guess, sports culture or reputation that Peterborough has. What did you feel when you were a city councillor from, I guess, constituents, what they were saying about sports? How much did that seem to matter when it was coming up to the top?
It didn't seem to matter a lot. It was the general mundane things, the roads, the homelessness wasn't really a problem in those days. Businesses coming to Peterborough, it was that mainly kind of thing. Now there was, to be fair, there was some concern about the availability of ice time. But with the Kinsman and North Crest, we were still short of space, but nevertheless it wasn't as huge an issue as it has been.
It'll be a perpetual concern.
I think
Yeah.
I think it will. Yeah, I don't know how you satisfy that demand completely.
Do you see space for the growth of sports from the UK in Canada? I know, obviously, soccer or football is the most popular sport in the world.
I think there's no question that soccer is going to expand. It's a game that anybody can play anywhere in the world. And again, they have various levels. And I think soccer, as a community sport, will expand considerably. And it's cheap to be involved with. I think that one of the problems hockey faces is the expense of it now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was leading into there with the lack of facilities, and maybe soccer just picks up. And people being put into this community, they're going to come from backgrounds likely in Europe or overseas,
Yeah.
where it's going to be more popular than hockey. Can you tell me a little bit about the two pictures that we have here?
What's that one? Oh, it's on the track.
Trent University, yeah, longtime rec director Paul Wilson starting a plan for retirement.
Oh, really? Well, yeah. I wouldn't view them now as European sports. I would view them as world sports. And I think one of the problems for hockey, as I've just said, is the expense. I'm not in tune with what an hour of ice time costs now.
At $250.
$250 an hour?
Yeah. I think that's for off-peak time as well.
Well, you see, when we first started, I think it was $25.
A pair of top-end skates will be $1,200 now as well.
Well,
Yeah.
that, and a top-end pair of soccer boots, what, are $100?
Or it could
Or
be
a-
$400.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's an increasing problem for hockey in particular. And football isn't cheap either.
Which one?
Football, Canadian football.
Yeah. No.
I don't know what those expenses are, but I think that's becoming a significant problem, the expense.
Yeah. As you do, I guess, sit back and look at the Peterborough sports scene at this point in time, and do you kind of think of what legacy you might have left on it?
Well, I feel very privileged and honoured to have been part of such a good sports scene, and anything I may have contributed to the growth of some of these so-called newer sports, I'm very honoured to be. And if you just take, we've just talked about rugby, how the growth of the Peterborough Rugby Club. Squash, there's the club on Chemong Road, which is doing very well. It's very well organised, and they have a very enthusiastic membership. And squash in particular has taken a bit of a beating during the pandemic because it's in an enclosed environment.
Yeah, you're in an aquarium essentially, or a terrarium playing the game.
Yes. So, and you can't play squash with a mask on because you can't breathe properly. And I couldn't play squash with a mask because my glasses would steam up. So that was a problem with squash clubs, and I know across the country they have taken a bit of a beating.
And that's where I guess you saw the most personal success competing in a sport, right? Is squash.
Yeah, no, I was fortunate, and I won a number of tournaments and at the age level group, and I'm still playing. Well, it's a different type of squash, but I'm playing this afternoon actually.
Great.
Well, it is. I'm very fortunate at 80 plus, and I'm waiting for the Canadian Squash 80 plus championship, when I might have to play one other person. And I'm very fortunate to be able still to play I mean, as I say, Dan, it's a different type of squash, but nevertheless, you're on a court getting exercise.
Still swinging the racket.
Exactly.
And still hitting the ball.
Yeah. So I can't complain at all.
And we didn't really touch on this too much. We've just had your, I guess, post-England era. From your 20s on, we've talked about. But we haven't gotten down to the root of sport for you. I know for most guys who grew up in Peterborough or girls who grew up in Peterborough, it might be on a pond somewhere, right? Or it might be on a field somewhere, and they can pinpoint that exact spot. Is that available to you in your memory? Do you know where it all started in England?
It is, actually. I went to what in England is called a public school, but it's actually a private school. Now, the reason I went there was because we couldn't afford it. But that school offered the sons of people who were killed in the war a free education. And my father had been killed at Dunkirk. So for 10 years, from 8 to 18, I got a free education. And the squash courts in that school and the rugby field and the cricket pitch are etched in my memory because they started me off, plus the coaches who were teachers there. And it's funny you should ask that because I did an article for the Old Boys magazine about that very topic, about the effect that those teachers had on me getting the job at Trent. And it's imprinted upon my mind those facilities, which were not top class, but they were very meaningful to me.
It sounds like you've lived your life trying to impart that gift that you got on others. It really does.
well, maybe. I know that at that school, Rossall, in the north of England, that was where my interest and values in sport were started. So I'm very grateful to that school.
It's a beautiful thing. It is.
No, it is.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And, so you took that from there and you brought it over here and you tried to spread that across the land pretty much. And yeah, that's...
Well, it's funny you should mention that because that was the tone of the article that I sent to them about the values that they'd instilled in me 60 years ago, I had taken with me to Trent University. And I was very grateful. Now, the coaches have all long gone, but I was hoping that the legacy could be, they have a sort of school library that they could display it in there. Whether they have done, I have no idea.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
Or maybe it's in a folder somewhere.
It's probably, or it could be in the waste paper basket.
Oh.
But no.
No, well, I think that's a great lesson for them to learn. I think a lot of people could benefit from that attitude towards sport, especially in North America, where it tends to all drive off of the, I guess, American football style of cutthroat, all the time, just work. It's very business-like, right?
Well, yes, and I think in North America, the goal is to play in the NFL. Well, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very small percentage that get that
Less
far.
than 1%.
Yes, yeah. And, to me, that is not the goal. That is the byproduct. And if some guy does that and does well, wonderful. But to me, that's not the goal. It's the average person who should get some enjoyment and some recreation and maybe a bit of compensation out of it. But I think that's one of the problems with American sport in particular.
All right. Do you have any last things about your sporting legacy that you want to share? Is there anything that we didn't touch on, that we didn't get to?
Well, no, you touched on most things. All I would say again is that, I've been privileged and honored to be part of the Peterborough sports scene. And as I say, I feel so lucky to live in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, when I look at today's world in particular.
That's awful. It's fun talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.